At 73 years old, I thought I had weathered every storm a man could face. Hurricanes on the Carolina coast, layoffs that nearly destroyed my construction firm, even the day cancer stole my Margaret after 50 beautiful years of marriage. But nothing, not even burying the love of my life, prepared me for the storm that came through a cell phone speaker in a sterile hospital waiting room. I was waiting for a routine heart exam when my only daughter's voice cut into me like a knife. Dad, Laura said cool and businesslike, tomorrow we're moving to Florida. I sold the Riverfront house and Mom's Bentley. We wired 15% of the sale to your account. That's more than generous for someone your age. Don't try to stop us. It's already done. 15% of the $3 million estate Margaret and I bought in 1985. Of the home where we raised our girl, where every Christmas we strung lights along the wide veranda where Margaret's rose garden stretched toward the Ashley River. 15% of the only place that had ever truly been ours. And the Bentley Margaret's polished pride. A classic worth 6 figures, but to her it was priceless. She called it more than generous. I called it robbery with a smile. I felt the blood drain from my face, my chest tight. Betrayal from a stranger is one thing. Betrayal from your own flesh and blood, that's a wound that cuts all the way through. My name is Arthur Beckett. I'm 73 years old. For nearly 5 decades, I was a structural engineer here in Charleston. My hands drew the blueprints for schools, bridges, and hospitals that still stand today. I built a reputation, a family, and I thought a legacy. I was married to Margaret, my high school sweetheart, for half a century. She was the mind behind the man, the one who could see through people's motives faster than I could read a blueprint. Together we built not just a home, but a life rooted in hard work, honesty, and faith. We only had one daughter, Laura. She was our pride, once the little girl who used to chase fireflies in the yard, who sat on my lap, while Margaret read Bible stories before bed. But somewhere along the way, greed sank its teeth into her heart. And my son-in-law, Ethan, he only sharpened that hunger. So there I was in that waiting room, an old man clutching a phone, hearing my only child tell me that everything Margaret and I had built together was gone. As the nurse called my name, I barely heard her. My wife's words came rushing back instead. Arthur, if Laura ever lets greed take hold, open the safe in the basement. You'll know when it's time. Back then, I didn't understand. But sitting there with my chest tight and my world collapsing, I realized Margaret had seen this betrayal coming long before I did. And before I take you further into what came next, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever felt the sting of being betrayed by your own family, the very people you thought would protect you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone in this. When I left the hospital that afternoon, I didn't drive straight home. I parked my old Ford pickup by the river and just sat there staring at the water. The Spanish moss swayed gently in the breeze just as it had for decades, but I felt like the whole world had shifted beneath me. How could Laura, our only child, the little girl Margaret adored, do this 15%? That was the number echoing in my head. 15% of my own home, of my wife's beloved Bentley, of a life's work, boiled down to scraps. I wanted to rage. I wanted to call a lawyer, write that second call, the police call, anyone. But in the quiet of that truck cab, Margaret's voice came back to me as clear as if she were sitting beside me. Arthur, she had whispered one night, when the sickness had left her too weak to lift her head. If Laura ever lets greed take her heart, You must open the safe in the basement. Trust me, you'll know when it's time. Back then I thought it was the medicine talking. Margaret always had a way of planning 5 steps ahead, but I didn't imagine she'd been planning for something like this. The truth is, Margaret's faith was stronger than mine. I believed in God. Sure, I sat in the pew, bowed my head, did the Sunday routine. But Margaret, she lived her faith. She believed that the Lord gave us challenges not to break us, but to reveal what we were made of. She trusted that even betrayal could be turned into a blessing if we met it with patience and wisdom. That day in the truck, my hands trembling on the wheel, I realized I had 2 choices. I could fight back immediately, let anger lead me, drag Laura through the courts. Or I could trust Margaret's wisdom, trust that maybe God was using this moment for something bigger than I could see. And so instead of calling a lawyer, I drove home. The house felt different when I walked in, heavier somehow. Every photograph on the wall seemed to watch me. Margaret smiling in her gardening hat. Laura on graduation day, Margaret's arm proudly around her shoulder. All those years of sacrifice, of doing without, so that Laura could have more. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where after Margaret's funeral, Laura had spread those estate documents across the surface. "Just sign here, Dad," she had said. "It'll take care of the medical bills." My grief had blinded me. I signed thinking I was sparing myself red tape. But now I could see the truth. Laura had slipped in power of attorney papers, legal tools, to move money while my guard was down. I laid my head on that same table, the wood cool against my skin, and I prayed for the first time in months. Lord, I don't understand why my daughter's heart has hardened. I don't know why you've taken Margaret and left me to face this alone. But if Margaret saw this coming, if she prepared something for me, help me find the strength to trust her. Help me see your plan in all this. When I lifted my head, I felt calmer. Not healed, not whole, but calmer. That night, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and went down into the basement. The air was cool, the concrete floor rough beneath my slippers. Against the back wall stood the old oak safe Margaret's father had given us when we first married. Heavy iron bolted untouched for years. I ran my fingers over the dial, remembering how Margaret always kept a small key tucked into her jewelry box, just in case. I hesitated. Part of me was afraid of what I might find. What if there was nothing inside? What if grief had made me misremember her words? But then I saw it in my mind as clear as day. Margaret's eyes, calm but insistent, her hand squeezing mine. "Arthur, you'll know when it's time," and I knew. This was the time. I didn't open the safe that night. My hands were too unsteady, my heart too raw. Instead, I sat on the basement steps, staring at the cold steel, whispering Margaret's name into the shadows. She had always been smarter with people than I was. She could read character like I read blueprints. If she had hidden something away, it wasn't just papers. It was a plan. And the thought of that plan, that Margaret might have left me a lifeline, a map out of this nightmare, kept me breathing. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake in our empty bed, listening to the old house creak, wondering what secrets my wife had locked away from me. By morning, I knew one thing for certain: Laura thought she had played the final move. But Margaret, she was always 3 moves ahead. And soon I was about to find out just how far ahead she had been. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. My hands were steady now, not like the night before. I went down to the basement, the same basement where I had sharpened tools and fixed bicycles when Laura was a little girl. This time I wasn't fixing a toy. I was fixing my life. The old oak safe stood waiting in the corner, silent and heavy, like it had been holding its breath for decades. I knelt down, feeling the ache in my knees, and slid the small brass key into the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism clicked deep and final, like the turning of a page in a book I hadn't known was still being written. When the door swung open, the first thing I saw was an envelope with my name written in Margaret's careful script. Arthur, it read in the handwriting I'd loved since the day we passed notes in high school. My throat tightened. I sat down on the cold basement floor, tore the envelope open, and unfolded the letter. Arthur, if you're reading this, it means Laura has let greed into her heart. I've seen the signs. Ethan whispers in her ear about investments and money, and she listens too closely. You always trusted too easily, my love, but I could see where this was headed. That's why I started preparing years ago. Inside this safe, you'll find documents, evidence, and a plan. Don't be afraid. Use them. You'll know what to do when the time comes. With all my love, Margaret. I pressed the paper to my face, breathing in the faint smell of lavender she always wore. For a moment, it was as if she were there beside me again, steadying my hands, whispering her faith into my fear. Behind the letter sat a small black video camera. My heart nearly stopped. I fumbled with the buttons until the tiny screen came alive. And then there she was. Margaret. Sitting on the edge of our bed, her silver hair brushed back neatly, her eyes clear and strong despite the illness that had been eating away at her body. She looked straight into the camera, straight into me. Arthur, she said softly, if you're watching this, then Laura has broken your heart. I prayed every day it wouldn't come to this, but I know my daughter. I've watched her change. The designer clothes, the way she talks about what we deserve, the endless questions about our finances. That's not the little girl who helped me bake cookies. That's Ethan talking through her. She paused, and I saw her eyes glisten, but her voice never wavered. I've gathered everything we need, photos of their spending, bank statements, even copies of contracts Ethan forged. I met with a lawyer, Susan Miller. She knows our situation. These documents are enough to stop them cold. But Arthur, don't rush. Don't let anger guide you. Let Laura fall if she must. Only when she reaches the bottom will she understand what she threw away. That's when you'll be ready to help her rebuild if she chooses to change. Trust me, Arthur. Trust the Lord. This is bigger than both of us. The video ended, and I sat in silence, tears running down my cheeks. I looked back into the safe. Stacks of neatly labeled folders filled the shelves. Bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. Names of companies I barely recognized, but apparently owned pieces of. Margaret had been playing chess while I was playing checkers. One folder was labeled in bold letters, Complete Financial Picture. I opened it, and my breath caught. For years, I thought my only real savings were my pension and our house. But Margaret, God bless her brilliant, patient mind, had quietly built something far greater. Beckett Engineering Supply. I'd known I was a silent partner, but I never realized Margaret had increased our stake to 35% ownership, valued at over $1.2 million. Real estate investments. 4 rental apartments downtown purchased quietly over the years, now worth $1.1 million combined. Inheritance funds. Margaret had invested her family farm sale money, $250,000 that had grown steadily for decades. Retirement accounts and bonds, nearly $400,000 more. I sat there with my hands shaking over the papers. Altogether, Margaret had built a fortress, nearly $3.5 million, all protected by trusts and LLCs, with her name as the registered agent. The most important part: the Charleston Riverfront house, the one Laura thought she sold, wasn't legally ours. It was owned by the Beckett Family Trust, which meant Laura never had the right to sell it in the first place. The sale was a sham, illegal from the start. I leaned back against the concrete wall, laughing and sobbing all at once. My Margaret. My brilliant, faithful Margaret. Laura thought she'd stolen from a helpless old man. But the truth was, she'd stepped straight into her mother's long-laid trap. And now, it was my move. I must have sat on that basement floor for an hour, papers spread out around me, like pieces of a puzzle only Margaret could have designed. Every folder I opened was another revelation, another reminder that while I had been busy building bridges and schools, she had been quietly building a fortress around our family. The Charleston Riverfront house, the one Laura thought she'd sold, untouchable. The deed wasn't in my name or hers. It was tucked safely inside the Beckett Family Trust. Margaret had set it up years ago with protections so airtight, a judge himself would have to pry them open. The Bentley registered under a separate LLC, not even legally tied to me, and those investments, the rentals, the stocks, the partnerships. I realized they weren't just about money. Margaret had scattered them across entities the way a general scatters soldiers across a battlefield, so that no single attack could ever wipe us out. My daughter thought she had taken everything. In reality, she had taken nothing at all. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the concrete wall. For the first time since Laura's phone call, I felt something more than anger. I felt awe. Awe at Margaret's foresight. Awe at the faith she had carried even when her body was failing. Because this wasn't just about protecting money. This was about protecting legacy. Protecting the soul of a family from being swallowed whole by greed. And that's when I realized something important. Margaret didn't build this fortress for herself. She built it for me, and though it broke my heart to admit it, even for Laura. It wasn't about punishing our daughter. It was about saving her, if she could be saved. I gathered the papers back into their folders, slid them carefully into the safe, and locked it again. My hands no longer shook. I wasn't just a grieving widower anymore. I was a man holding the blueprints of a plan bigger than my anger. Before I carry you any further into this story, I need to stop and ask you something. If you're still with me here, if you followed me through the shock of my daughter's betrayal and into the heart of my wife's secret, drop a 1 in the comments right now. I want to know you're still walking this road with me. Because the road ahead gets darker before it gets light again. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, Margaret's letter beside my coffee mug. I stared at her handwriting until my eyes blurred. She had trusted me to carry this plan forward, but part of me wondered, did I have the strength? I was a builder, not a strategist. Margaret was the chess player. I was just the man laying the bricks. Could I really follow through with her instructions? Could I really stand by while my only daughter fell deeper into Ethan's web of lies? My heart screamed to act immediately, to call Susan Miller, the lawyer Margaret mentioned, and stop the whole charade before Laura lost another dollar. But my wife's words echoed louder than my fear. Let her fall if she must. Only at the bottom will she understand what she threw away. And so I made a decision, a painful one. I wouldn't rescue Laura yet. Not because I didn't love her, but because love sometimes means stepping back and letting life teach the lesson you never could. I didn't know then just how far Ethan's betrayal went. I didn't know about the gambling debts, the forged signatures, the predators waiting for their money back. But I was about to find out. What I did know was this: Margaret had seen it coming. She had left me the tools to fight. And when the time was right, I would. But first I had to learn the full truth about the man my daughter had married. And what I discovered about Ethan Ward nearly broke me all over again. I didn't sleep much after that night in the basement. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's face on that little camera screen, warning me in her calm, steady voice. Ethan wasn't just a bad influence, he was the knife pressed against the throat of our family. And if I wanted to understand how deep this betrayal ran, I needed to know the man who had stolen my daughter's heart. So I did what Margaret always told me to do when I faced a problem too big for my own two hands. I asked for help. Eddie McLean, my oldest friend, had been a private investigator for the sheriff's office before retirement. He was the kind of man who could pull threads until the whole sweater unraveled. When I told him what Margaret had left me, he agreed to dig into Ethan. Arthur Eddy said, sliding a folder across my kitchen table a week later, "You'd better brace yourself. This boy's not just careless, he's poison." Inside were photographs, receipts, even casino records. 4 years ago, just before Ethan married Laura, he had started frequenting luxury casinos in Miami. At first, small losses, a few $1,000s at blackjack tables, champagne on ice hotel suites overlooking Biscayne Bay. But then the losses grew. By the time he walked Laura down the aisle, he was already 45,000 sutels in debt. 2 years ago, he doubled it, borrowing on credit cards, taking out cash advances. Last year, he was betting $20,000 hands of poker like it was pocket change. One photo nearly knocked the breath out of me. Ethan grinning at a poker table, Rolex flashing on his wrist, a glass of top-shelf whiskey in his hand. Beside him, stacks of chips worth more than I earned in a year of construction work. "He's been banned from 3 casinos," Arthur Eddy said grimly. "And not for winning too much, for begging too much. Borrowing from men you don't want to owe. You know the type." My stomach turned. I did know the type. I'd built houses for men like that, shadows in sharp suits, cash that smelled like gasoline. They weren't the kind you paid back with checks, but the worst blow was yet to come. Eddie flipped another page. "You ever wonder why he's so eager about Costa Rica?" I nodded slowly. "It's not for business, Arthur. It's for hiding. He's been asking around about property laws down there for over a year. No extradition treaties for debts, offshore accounts. He wasn't planning an investment. He was planning an escape." I clenched my fists on the table. My daughter hadn't married a husband. She'd married a parasite looking for a host. But Eddie wasn't finished. He showed me a series of statements Margaret had already collected credit cards in Laura's name maxed out without her knowledge. A home equity line of credit nearly drained. Even her personal savings account bled dry over emergency investments. "Total damage," Eddie asked. 85,000, give or take. And that's before whatever stunt he's pulling in Costa Rica. I pushed back from the table and paced the kitchen. I could almost hear Margaret's voice again. Only when Laura hits bottom will she understand. God help me, my instinct as a father screamed at me to end this immediately. To freeze their accounts, drag Ethan into court, and bring Laura home before she lost another dime. But then I remembered the look in Margaret's eyes in that video, painful, steady, faithful. She knew Ethan, she knew Laura, and she knew me. If I struck now, Laura would never see the truth. She'd think I was punishing her. She'd cling tighter to the man, destroying her, believing he was the only one who stood by her side. So instead, I asked Eddie the hardest question of my life. How long before he runs out of rope? Eddie studied the file. Not long. The sharks he owes money to, they're circling. When the cash dries up, he'll do what men like him always do, vanish. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer under my breath. Lord, give me the strength to wait. Give me the strength to let my daughter see the truth with her own eyes. Because now I understood. This wasn't just about saving money or property. This was about saving Laura's soul from a man who had never loved her at all. And the only way to do that was to let him destroy himself. The night after Eddie laid those files on my table, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, too quiet. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the grandfather clock filled the space where Margaret's laughter used to live. I had the evidence. Proof that Ethan was drowning in debts, proof he was using Laura like a life raft. Proof that Costa Rica wasn't a new beginning, it was an escape route. Every fiber of me as a father wanted to act. Pick up the phone call Susan Miller, the lawyer Margaret had trusted, and slam the door shut on Ethan's schemes before another dollar vanished. But I didn't. Instead, I opened Margaret's Bible, the one still sitting on the side table, where she used to read it every morning with her tea. A pressed rose from her garden marked the page, and there it was underlined in her careful hand. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. I read it over and over again, letting the words settle into the hollowness of my chest. The truth. That was what Margaret had wanted for Laura, not just to be rescued, not to be shielded, but to see the truth for herself. And it hit me then. If I rushed in too soon, if I swept in with lawyers and court orders, Laura would never see Ethan for what he was. She'd believe I was controlling her, punishing her, maybe even jealous of her husband. That was the cruelest twist of betrayal. She would see me, her own father, as the villain, while clinging to the man who was bleeding her dry. Margaret understood something I had never been able to grasp. Sometimes love doesn't mean pulling someone out of the fire. Sometimes love means letting them feel the heat long enough to know why the flames burn. I closed the Bible and whispered into the silence. Lord, I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. Help me wait. Help me trust. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. Every time the phone rang, my heart stopped. Was it Laura? Was she safe? Had Ethan finally disappeared with everything? At first, her calls were full of excitement. She described office space near the beach. Local investors, Ethan had connections with plans to import construction supplies, with profit margins she could barely contain her excitement over. I listened, forcing myself to sound calm, even as I clenched the phone so tight my knuckles went white. I knew none of it was real. I had the documents, the proof, the lies spelled out in black and white. But I also knew Margaret was right, so I kept my voice steady. I'm glad you're happy, sweetheart. Just be careful. Weeks passed. The excitement in Laura's voice began to fade. She mentioned Ethan working 18-hour days, always meeting with people she wasn't allowed to meet. Plans shifting constantly from construction to real estate to import-export schemes that never seemed to land. The money's moving faster than we expected, she said once, her voice low. But Ethan says it's normal for a startup. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. I wanted to shout the truth to tell her she was being scammed by her own husband. But instead I remembered Margaret's words. Let her fall if she must. So I said only, I'm praying for you, Laura. Every day. By the fourth week, her tone had changed completely. The excitement was gone. In its place was something I hadn't heard in years, fear. Dad, she whispered over a crackling line, I think something's wrong. The office space is empty now. The business papers don't look real. Ethan keeps saying I'm interfering, that I don't understand. I don't know what's happening. I closed my eyes, fighting back the urge to tell her everything I knew. Sweetheart, I said quietly, just hold on. You'll see the truth soon enough. When the call ended, I sat back in my chair, staring at Margaret's Bible on the table. The truth will set you free. But the truth, I realized, often comes with a price, and Laura was about to pay it in full. By the fifth week, the phone calls stopped coming. The silence was worse than any lie. I'd sit at the kitchen table every evening, Margaret's Bible on one side, her folders of evidence on the other, staring at the phone until my eyes burned. And then just when I thought I couldn't bear the silence another day, the phone rang. It was Laura. Her voice was hollow, cracked with tears. Dad, Ethan's gone. He emptied our account. The apartment's lease was fake. The business was never real. I'm sitting here with $50 and a suitcase. I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, the weight of her words pressing down like the heaviest beam I'd ever carried in my life. I wanted to say, come home, sweetheart. I'll fix it. But Margaret's letter echoed in my ears. Only at the bottom will she understand. Where are you staying? I asked. A hostel, she whispered. It's dirty. There are 6 of us in one room. I've been selling my jewelry just to eat. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. My daughter, who once wore designer dresses, who used to park her mother's Bentley outside Charleston boutiques, was now sleeping on bunk beds in a foreign hostel, trading gold bracelets for food. Every part of me wanted to send money, instantly wire a ticket home, end her suffering. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, I love you, Laura. Remember that. When the call ended, I sat there trembling. Eddie, who had stopped by with a 6-pack of beer, leaned back in his chair and studied me. You could end this right now, Arthur, he said gently. Freeze Ethan's accounts. Wire Laura the money. Bring her home. I could, I admitted. But if I do, she won't learn. She'll think her old man bailed her out again. And next time she'll fall right back into another scheme, another smooth talker. Eddie nodded slowly. So what's the plan? I looked at Margaret's folders. The plan is patience. The plan is faith. Let her see what happens when you build on lies instead of foundations. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls became more desperate. Dad, the embassy helped me get papers, but I don't have enough for a flight home. Dad, I tried getting work as a tutor, but they want permits I don't have. Dad, I'm scared. I don't know who to trust. Everyone here wants money. Each call tore me open, but I forced myself to keep my voice calm. Hold on, sweetheart. You're stronger than you think. At night, I walked the empty halls of the house, hearing Margaret's footsteps in every creak. Sometimes I stood by her rose garden now overgrown with weeds and whispered into the night air, "I hope you're right, Margaret, because this is killing me." But Margaret had always been right, and I started to see it tiny cracks forming in Laura's pride. One voicemail broke me and gave me hope all at once. "Dad, I don't deserve your help after what I did. I sold our home. I betrayed you. I thought I was smarter, but I was blind. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything, I don't know how to get out." I replayed it 3 times, my hand over my face, tears soaking my palm. Because for the first time in years, my daughter's voice carried something I hadn't heard since she was a child. Humility. And that was when I knew Margaret's plan was working. So I began to prepare. Not for revenge, not just for recovery, but for rebuilding. I called Susan Miller, the lawyer, and told her to finalize the asset recovery process, but to hold the filings until I gave the word. The trust had already protected the house, the investments were intact. Ethan's fraudulent sales were void. Legally, we had won, but winning in court wasn't the same as winning Laura back. So my plan was twofold: protect everything Margaret had built. Let Laura come home with nothing so she could learn what it meant to build from the ground up. It went against every fatherly instinct I had, but it aligned perfectly with Margaret's wisdom and with the faith she lived by. Because real redemption doesn't come with bailouts. It comes with lessons earned the hard way. By the 6th week, the inevitable happened. Laura's final voicemail came through in the middle of the night. "Dad," she sobbed, "I'm broken. I have nothing. Please. I just want to come home." I sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, Margaret's Bible open on my lap. And I whispered back into the silence, "It's time." The night Laura's final voicemail came through, I barely slept. I lay awake in the dark house, Margaret's Bible open on my chest, listening to her voice crackle through the replay. "Dad, I'm broken. I have nothing. Please. I just want to come home." By morning, I knew it was time. I called the embassy, arranged for her emergency papers to be expedited, and booked her a flight home. When I drove to the Charleston airport 3 days later, I braced myself. I wasn't picking up the same woman who had left head high and dripping in designer labels. I was picking up the broken pieces of my daughter, and I was determined not to let pity undo the lesson Margaret had worked so hard to build. I spotted her in the arrivals hall before she saw me. Laura Beckett, my once proud daughter, walked toward me in worn jeans and a t-shirt that had seen too many washes. Her hair was unkempt, her shoulders slumped, and the confidence she once wore like armor was gone. In its place was a woman who had been stripped of everything but humility. When her eyes found mine, she burst into tears. The suitcase slipped from her hand, and she ran into my arms like she hadn't done since she was 10 years old. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she sobbed against my shoulder. "I betrayed you. I betrayed Mom's memory. I thought I was so smart, but I was a fool. Ethan, he destroyed me, and I let him." I held her tight, my own tears spilling down, but I whispered only, "You're not destroyed, sweetheart. You're finally awake." The drive home was quiet except for the occasional choked apology from Laura. I didn't scold her. I didn't lecture. I just let the silence sit heavy but necessary. Back at the house, we sat at the same kitchen table where she had once slid those papers in front of me, tricking me into signing away control. But this time the power was in my hands. I pulled out Margaret's little video camera and placed it on the table. Laura's red eyes widened when her mother's face filled the screen. Margaret's voice said gently, "If you're watching this, it means you've gone too far. I begged you to remember what matters, but greed blinded you. Money doesn't make you better than people. It makes you responsible for them. Your father and I built this life not to spoil you, but to secure you. And if you've lost it all, then maybe, just maybe, you've gained the one thing we prayed for: wisdom." Laura covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom knew. She knew I'd do this. I slid another folder across the table, the same one that held the trust papers. "Laura," I said quietly, "you thought you sold this house, but you didn't. Your mother protected it. She protected everything. You didn't just betray me, you underestimated her. She buried her face in her hands. I thought I was stealing from a helpless old man. But you and Mom, you were 10 steps ahead." I let the silence hang before I spoke again. "Do you know what hurts most, Laura? Not that you tried to take the money. Not even that you signed away my trust. What hurts is that you forgot who raised you, who gave you everything we had. You sold more than a house. You sold your mother's roses, your childhood birthdays, every memory we built together." "I know," she whispered, "and I hate myself for it." I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. "Don't hate yourself. Learn from yourself. That's the only way forward." That night, I made her sleep in her old room, stripped bare of the luxuries she once demanded. No designer clothes, no bank accounts waiting for her. Just 4 walls, a bed, and the memories she had tried to bury under Ethan's lies. It wasn't punishment. It was foundation. And as I lay in my own room, later staring at the ceiling, I whispered into the quiet, "Margaret, she's home. She's broken, but she's home. Now it's time to rebuild." Because this wasn't the end of Laura's fall. It was only the beginning of her climb back up. And come morning, she would learn the first rule of her new life: if you want respect, you earn it. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Old habit. Years on construction sites had trained me to rise early, to breathe in the quiet before the noise of the world began. But this morning felt different. The house wasn't just quiet, it was heavy waiting. Laura shuffled into the kitchen, eyes swollen from a night of crying. She sat across from me, her shoulders hunched, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Dad," she whispered, "what happens now?" I took a slow sip of coffee, then set the mug down. "Now," I said, "you work, you rebuild, you prove to me, to yourself and to your mother, that you can be more than what you've been." She nodded quickly, almost desperately. "I'll do anything." And so began the hardest, most humbling season of her life. Laura's first job was at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where construction workers grabbed their coffee before heading to the job site. Minimum wage, long shifts, sore feet. I'd pass by some mornings watching her through the window. There was my daughter, hair tied back, apron smudged, pouring coffee for men who didn't know she once lived in a luxury condo, who didn't care that she used to drive her mother's Bentley. The first week, she came home exhausted, blisters on her heels, hands red from scrubbing dishes. But she didn't complain. She'd collapse at the kitchen table, count her tips, crumpled singles and coins, and whisper, "Every dollar I make now, I know exactly what it costs." For the first time, I saw pride in her eyes that didn't come from what she spent, but from what she earned. After 2 months, I added another layer to Margaret's plan: community service. Laura started volunteering at a senior home Sunset Manor, where Margaret once helped with fundraisers. There she met men and women who had stories that mirrored ours in painful ways. There was Mrs. Patterson, 82 years old, whose son had drained her savings and disappeared to Florida. Mr. Chen, whose daughter visited once a year but never called. Dozens of elders abandoned by the very children they had sacrificed everything for. Laura came home after her first week, tears in her eyes. "Dad, I see myself in their stories. I see what I did to you. How I must have made you feel." And that was when I knew the lesson was sinking deeper than money ever could. The final piece of Margaret's plan was education. At night, I sat with Laura at the kitchen table just as Margaret had planned and spread out the folders. Investments, trusts, bonds, Margaret's lifetime of strategy. Laura leaned over the papers wide-eyed. "Mom didn't just save money," she whispered. "She built an empire $1 at a time." I nodded. She knew real wealth isn't about spending. It's about discipline, about responsibility. Laura studied hard, asked questions, filled notebooks with what she learned. For the first time in years, I saw her hunger for knowledge, not for luxury, but for wisdom. By month 6, the transformation was undeniable. Customers at the cafe requested Laura by name. The seniors at Sunset Manor lit up when she arrived. And even the men at Beckett Engineering Supply, the same ones who had watched her grow up, remarked on how different she seemed. "She's not the same girl who left Arthur," Eddie said one evening as we sat on the porch. "Your Margaret's plan worked." And he was right. One Sunday afternoon, Laura and I drove back to the Riverfront house. The trust had secured it, the fraudulent sale erased. As we walked through the rooms, sunlight streaming through the windows, dust dancing in the beams, I felt Margaret's presence everywhere. Laura paused in the kitchen, her hand on the counter where Margaret used to roll dough for Sunday pies. "I sold this," she said softly, "for a con man's lies. I thought money mattered more than memories." I put my arm around her shoulders. "Your mother always said mistakes are only permanent if you don't learn from them. You're learning. That's what matters." She leaned her head against me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had my daughter back. Not the greedy, entitled woman Ethan had twisted her into, but the little girl who once chased fireflies in the yard, who once promised her mother she'd grow into someone kind. That night, I sat alone on the porch, the river glowing under the moonlight. I whispered into the air, "She's changing, Margaret. Just like you said she would. Your plan wasn't just about saving our money. It was about saving her soul." And in that quiet moment, I swear I felt Margaret's presence again, not in sorrow, but in joy. Because Laura's story wasn't ending in betrayal. It was beginning in redemption. 6 months after Laura returned home, I sat at the same kitchen table where this whole nightmare had begun. Only this time, it wasn't a table of deception and signatures. It was a table of hope. Across from me, Laura was bent over Margaret's old investment notes, her brow furrowed, pencil tapping against a notepad. Not because she was scheming, not because she was chasing a shortcut, but because she was learning. And for the first time since Margaret passed, I felt peace. One evening, Laura looked up from her notes and said, "Dad, Mom was brilliant. She built all this not for herself, not even for you. She built it for us, for me to understand what real security means. It's not just money, is it?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart. It's character." Money without character is like a house without a foundation. It might look good for a while, but one storm and it's gone. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. I don't deserve another chance, but I want to live in a way that would make her proud. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You're already on your way. In the months that followed, Laura earned her place at Beckett Engineering Supply, not as an heiress, not as a spoiled child, but as a worker. She started as an administrative assistant, learning the ropes, humbling herself to tasks she once would have called beneath her. The men who had known her since childhood pulled me aside one afternoon. Arthur, one of them, said, she's got Margaret's head for numbers and your work ethic. If she keeps this up, she'll run this place better than any of us. And I believed him. That fall, Laura and I established the Margaret Beckett Financial Literacy Program at the local community college. Every week, Laura taught women who had been trapped in financial abuse, wives drained by gambling husbands, mothers tricked into signing papers they didn't understand. She didn't just teach them numbers, she taught them dignity. She shared her own scars, her own mistakes, and the lessons she had paid dearly to learn. I watched from the back of the classroom one evening as she said, "Real wealth isn't what you inherit. It's what you build through honest work, through faith, through loving people more than money." My heart swelled, because those were Margaret's words spoken through our daughter's voice. Ethan's story ended the way Margaret predicted it would. He was arrested in Panama running the same scams on desperate investors. The debts he owed finally caught up with him, not in courtrooms, but in alleys where the men he borrowed from didn't carry briefcases. When Laura heard, she didn't celebrate. She only whispered, "I feel sorry for him. He never learned what I had to learn, and that was enough." Looking back now, I see it clearly. Margaret didn't just save our family's money. She saved our family's soul. She saw the storm coming and built not walls, but a foundation that could withstand it. Through faith, she turned betrayal into redemption. Through patience, she turned greed into humility. Through love, she turned a broken daughter into a woman reborn. And through it all, I learned the hardest truth a father can accept. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child isn't rescuing them. It's letting them fall and trusting that God Himself will catch them. Now, if you've walked with me all the way through this story, let me ask you, have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it nearly broke you only to see God use it for something greater? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how faith and resilience carried you through. And if this journey moved, you don't forget to follow this channel. Here we tell stories of betrayal, redemption, and the unshakable dignity of family and faith. Because sometimes the darkest chapters of our lives aren't the end. They're the beginning of a testimony worth sharing.